Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, and I am continuing my build here of the Estes Great Goblin, and it is time to start working on the finishing process. So quickly, just as an aside, I'm not actually going to do it, but this stuff right here, it's brand new, unopened set of epoxy clay. In case you were curious what that is, basically, yeah, it's not a liquid, it's two solids, and you mix them together. This stuff is supposed to be a little bit more sculptable, let's say, than the stuff you can find generally at the hardware store, which is fine, I guess, but I do have some issues with it. So I'm going to give this a try at some point, but I don't think this rocket is the one that really is going to require that. What I am going to do today is I'm going to put wood fill on the wooden elements. Because they get grain in them, and that doesn't look good. So I'm using this stuff right here. I happen to like this. You can use pretty much any kind of like spackle kind of material, wood fill. I do dilute it a little bit with water, just a little bit, very little bit, a few milliliters, not much at all, just to make it more viscous, well, less viscous actually, more like a paint viscosity rather than the paste that it is. You certainly could put it on as a paste, but it's a real pain, honestly, and you probably end up wasting a lot. So I don't do that. Also worth mentioning, I did take the time to paint the nose cone, cuff of tape around this part just so it didn't get painty, but otherwise black paint. Oh, and by the way, the Estes plastic that they use is usually pretty good about accepting spray paint just as is, but it's not the world's worst idea to use a plastic primer to put down first. Some kind of spray paints, it's more really the issue with the plastic and the nose cone, but both really, the plastic and the paint, they don't always like each other all that much. And sometimes you can get like nasty runs, and sometimes the paint doesn't really adhere to the plastic at all, and you can get like big flakes peeling off of it. But these nose cones from Estes, whatever this plastic is, tends to hold the paint pretty well. So I actually just went straight with the black paint there. And it seems fine. So good enough. All right, anyway. So on to the wood fill. I have used about a tablespoon maybe of my wood fill and hardly any water. Like I said, just a few milliliters. I did stir it up a little bit with the plastic spoon I used to portion it, but it does require a bit more work. This stuff, provided that it is still a little bit flexible, it does like water. It soaks it up pretty quickly. I've had this stuff dry out totally in the past, and you can rehydrate it if you need to. Fortunately, I haven't reached that point. I think I've done a better job of actually sealing off the can. So anyway, this is a pretty straightforward process. All I'm going to do is just brush this stuff on. I want to get good coverage. I also want to not leave like really obvious brush strokes if I can help it. So I'm going to just start with getting the good coverage on, and then I do kind of a removal process more than anything else, rather than an additive process if I can help it. So this, I feel like I've said this a lot of times. I'm sure I have. If you've watched more than one video, it's probably going to get a little repetitive, but it's kind of a repetitive process. If you are putting something wet on balsa, it does have a penchant for warping. So I'm going to be conscious about the order in which I do the fins here. I'm going to do one side, and then I'm immediately going to go to the other side and do that. The reason is, if there is warping, and ideally there really won't be on a piece of balsa that's as thick as these fins, but it's just a good habit to get into. So if there's going to be some warping, if you do one side and then immediately do the other, you're kind of putting the power of the water at work against itself. So it's going to warp one direction on one side of the fin, and then hopefully it's going to warp back the other way on the other side, and you end up with kind of a net zero effect. Ideally, I mean, you don't really want it to warp at all, but if it's going to, it would be nice to not really have to worry about, doing it in such a fashion where you'd have to deal with the warp after the fact. That being said, there are times when you actually kind of want a warp. This is not one of those times, but if you ever try to make a helicopter rocket, which is a very interesting approach to recovery, which I honestly I've built one, but it did not fly well. So it's something I have to try again at some point in the future. But if you want to get the rotation of the fins going properly, one way to handle that is to purposefully put a warp into the fins so they act like an airfoil. All right, so first fin's done. I might have actually undershot on how much of this stuff I need. We'll certainly see. So I'm going to get as much of this done as I can, as quickly as I can. Notice too, I was busy talking about other stuff at the time, but I also did take the time to put some of this stuff on the edges. And I rounded them all, so there's probably less of a need to do that. But if you ever are going to leave one face, of the fin not rounded or not airfoiled, it would be wise to apply a layer of this stuff because, I mean, balsa, it's porous, right? So it has holes in it. And one of the kind of obvious things that you can see if you cut it against the grain is you can see the pore structure. And that actually is kind of hard to fill in with paint after the fact. So it's a lot easier to just put a layer of this stuff on the edges. And then you don't have to try to deal with the fact that part of your rocket looks like it's got a bit of Swiss cheese factor going on there. Paint fills better is really the bottom line. I actually thought I was overshooting with the amount of the stuff I whipped up here. But yeah, this is a lot of surface area, so it's going to take a decent amount. It seems to be pretty thirsty, so that's okay. I'm going to use up what I have here, and if I run low, well, that'll be the end of the video, but I will then immediately continue once I've whipped up a little bit more of this stuff. It's probably going to be pretty close. I do try to overshoot for a couple reasons. One is whatever excess you have, you can put it back in the container. It's not going to hurt anything. In fact, it's probably a good thing because you're going to partially rehydrate the container, and it slowly dries out over time, and that's probably something you want to avoid. Now, notice, sorry to interrupt myself there, but I'm going to just run the brush over this too. If there are any little porous spots, I'm plugging them, but I'm also making sure I don't leave any particularly odious blobs along the edge of the fin. I would rather not do that since I did spend all that time shaping them. That's a time-consuming process, and I would rather not have to go through it all over again after this stuff dries and I sand it out and I discover that I've got, just giant blobs of wood fill that need to come off. The goal in doing this, by the way, is that you're adding this extra layer, right? And it's not that you're trying to make a new surface exactly. Most of this stuff is going to come off. Almost all of it, if you do it right, is going to come off. What's left, the excess, after you've sanded, is going to be in a fairly specific location, and that is wherever the grain of the wood was particularly deep. That's the whole goal. It's not to coat everything and, have a brand new, supposedly flat surface. Because we are adding weight doing this. Fortunately, it's a minimum weight if you do take the time to sand most of this stuff off, and it's worth the expenditure of time and effort. There we go. But still, nonetheless, the goal is to be plugging the valleys, not smoothing everything, not replacing the surface entirely. Yeah, it looks like I'm probably going to get about 3 out of 4 fins done with this particular amount. That's fine. It'd be nice if I got all 4 done, but, it's not the end of the world. It would actually be kind of a problem if I got like 2.5 done, because then I would be leaving the wood to warp while I go around making a new batch. So I would want to get that done quickly. Fortunately, I don't think, it shouldn't be an issue. I do want to take off, as I start running low, this stuff is kind of getting used up and it's getting more thick. So there are a little more blobs that show up. Well, I am going to throw a bit of caution to the wind here. Actually, you know what? It'd be a more prudent thing to do here. When I have excess, one of the things that is a decent idea to do is to use this stuff to patch up the spiral in the tube. So this tube it's pretty good, but I can still see a little bit of the spiral. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of the wood fill and I'm going to kind of pat it in to where I see the spiral, like so. This doesn't take very much, by the way. This is a pretty material light process. Anyway, so once I have a decent amount of that taken care of, I'm just going to try to brush it smooth. And I'm going to have to then, of course, sand this. Because if you take the time to do this, please, whoops, there goes my epoxy. Please do take the time to sand it back down, because as it is, this is way, way worse looking than just the somewhat noticeable spiral of the tube. If you just leave this and don't sand it, you made yourself just an awful, awful mess. There usually, too, I don't know why this is. I'm sure it's part of the manufacturing process, but there always seems to be like, there's a primary spiral that's usually pretty noticeable, and then there's like a secondary one that is less obvious. Like this one I'm just following, and I've followed it all the way since the one fin junction. There's my hole for the launch lug. I want to make sure, or not launch lug, rail button. I really don't want to fill that in. Anyway, I haven't really ever seen one that has a spiral that's so bad on both of them that I've had to fill both in, but usually one of them is kind of obvious. And in fact, sometimes it's only really obvious in part of the tube, but not the whole thing, which is another, I don't know how that happens. I need to move these. But, it happens, and it is worth, if you're looking for a good coat, like if you don't really care about the aesthetics, then don't waste your time. If this is purely like you want aerodynamics and nothing else, I mean, having a smooth rocket paint coat is going to be better, but I can't imagine that this would really be worth your time. Try to get that off. I have a penchant too for getting some of this stuff on and around launch lugs and then having to clean them out after the paint job is on, which is mildly irritating. There we go. All right, almost done. A little bit more, which is great because this stuff is almost exhausted too. Ooh, that's way too much. do have one more fin to do, and another, I don't know, 9 inches of tube here to coat. Anyway, the next, actually, this looks pretty good here. I don't think I'm going to bother going any farther up than this. I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound, but that's fine. I'll keep going. Why not? The next phase, as I was saying, is this needs to dry, which this stuff dries really quickly, actually. It's probably good to go in about half an hour. I usually let it go overnight, do it the next day. But then I'm going to sand this off. And that part, that's probably going to take longer than applying this, unfortunately. If you have a lot of surface area of fin like I do here, then sanding this off could take a while. And it's not my favorite process. I've been doing it outside recently because it's been nice out, but it does take a while. It does tend to make a pretty serious mess. It does sand nicely for what it's worth, but it's still a lot of work to do. This one probably won't be as bad as some of the other kits I built recently with regard to that, because there's the fins are fairly basic designs. There's not a lot. Those are only 4 of them. There aren't a lot of little canard fins or anything like that, so that's at least good. Ooh, that's kind of a mess. I'm getting down to the point where this is almost back to the putty consistency that it was when I started, so I am rapidly running out of time with this stuff. Again, it's not that big a deal. You can always rehydrate it. Just a little bit of water, tiny bit of water, right? And then it springs back to life, as it were. Last little stretch. There we go. All right. That was fun and exciting. All right, so I have one more fin left to do. I'm going to do that off camera. I'm going to sand stuff down off camera. I'm probably also going to put this stuff on. It's a sanding sealer. I'm going to do it after I sand and then sand that off. I doubt I'm going to make a video of that either. This is enough of me painting white colored goop onto something. We'll probably pick it up after I paint, honestly. So I will see you then. Thanks for watching.